Hello everyone, it's Allegra Integra, and today I'm going to do a quick January wrap-up. Before I get into the meat of the video, I do want to address, I know that my audio isn't great. I am just using my cell phone right now. If anyone has any recommendations for affordable vlog cameras and microphones, please let me know. That is something that I'm planning on investing in soon. I have a limited budget, but I want to have fun with this channel and I would love those recs. Thank you. So let's just get started. So the first book that I read in January was Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is a sci-fi story about a young woman who is the first of her people to be accepted into a prestigious space university, and she is kind of documenting her experiences on a living ship that takes her to the school. And something happens on the way there. I don't want to get into too many details. This is actually a novella, and if I get into too much, I'll just give everything away. I did give this 4 stars. I was really impressed with the general vibe of the writing. I really appreciate Afrofuturism. I'm trying to read more of that. There's a lot of optimism in that type of sci-fi, which I am living for right now. And I really enjoyed Okorafor's prose. I thought it was pretty straightforward, but done in a way that kind of read like an oral history, which was clearly very important for the storytelling aspect. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5. I'm actually pretty picky about giving 5 stars. You'll probably see that as I do more of these. But I did give this a solid 4 stars. Novellas usually don't get into the detail that I want them to get into. I do think that the length of this story limited it, and while that prose was great and straightforward, I would have liked a little bit more explanation as to what was actually happening and why these certain politics, they're not even really politics, but these certain tensions already existed, other than something being pretty cut and dried, straightforward, like a black and white decision. And I felt like the resolution was a bit fast. There are other books in this. It's the first in a series, and I do plan on continuing those, and I think those will probably expand on it more. But yeah, a solid 4 stars for me. The next book I finished in January was Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, who is a therapist. This is a nonfiction book, and it is kind of her retelling of being a therapist who is going to therapy. My career is parallel to therapy. I am not a therapist, although I am considering going back to school to become one. And I also just really love therapeutic texts that aren't specifically self-help books, which this definitely fell under. I go to therapy, I'm a big proponent of therapy, and I appreciate when a therapist tells their clients that they go to therapy too. This is a really interesting, it's not a set of essays, but it kind of feels like it. There is a through line because she's going to therapy to kind of deal with a recent breakup, while she's also still providing therapy to people who have problems ranging from, your everyday stressors to dealing with the fact that someone is dying young. She does make it very clear that she kind of fictionalized everybody, including her own therapist, for everyone's privacy, including hers, which obviously, if you know anything about therapy, she would kind of have to do to fall under ethics. Overall, this was a solid book. I gave it another 4 stars. It kept my attention. As far why I didn't give it 5 stars, it got a little rambly at times, and it could be a little self-indulgent. I guess memoirs by their nature are self-indulgent, but it didn't grab me as much as I wanted it to for it to be a 5 star. Real quick, for something to be a 5 star for me, it usually means I want to reread it. And I can really enjoy a book and think, but I don't need to read that again. So that usually will fall under that 4 to 4.5 star range. And from me, a 3 star rating is not a bad rating, which brings me to the next book. I know some people, a 3 star is like, it was just okay, but I fall on a 3 star, it was fine. I liked it okay. I didn't mind reading it. So it's not a bad review from me. For some reason, I decided to pick up another nonfiction book while I was reading the memoir. For some reason, January was very memoir / nonfiction heavy for me. But the next book that I read was Emotional Agility by, what's her name? Susan David. So Emotional Agility is a book about kind of recognizing what your emotional reactions are and going forward with those in a healthy way. She kind of splits people into two groups. You have people who brood, and then you have people who just kind of react. And it was pretty interesting. Susan Collins is a researcher. She's a psychology PhD, I believe. And she does a good job of setting things out in a very straightforward way. I ended up giving this 3 stars because this is based off of an article that she wrote several years ago, and I feel like you really get what you need from the article, and it didn't need an entire book. I highly recommend it to people who aren't familiar with the concept of emotional agility or haven't read a lot about kind of recognizing that space between the emotion that you feel and the actions that you take in response to that emotion. But that's something that I've been working on both in my career and in my personal life pretty much since I was 19. So it wasn't anything new to me. It's definitely a solid book. The research sounds good. Looked good, I should say. But yeah, it was a 3-star for me. The next book that I read in January was Soft Science by Franny Choi, and this is a poetry collection that's kind of focused on looking at the intersection of femininity, gender, sex, technology, loneliness, which was very much up my alley right now. You're going to hear this a lot. 2020 was a rough year. This was a great time to read this particular collection, especially with some more recent developments about how technology is interacting with our lives. I was really excited for this. I used to read a lot of poetry. I'm trying to get back into it. And this was a pretty solid start. There were a couple poems in it that she went a little too abstract. And I am a big fan of abstract poetry. I would say my favorite poet is probably E.E. Cummings. And she actually has a poem in this book that is set up like a programming language, but at the same time echoes some of E.E. Cummings' more famous poems with their punctuation breaks. However, since this is done in a programming language style, you can actually kind of see the reasoning behind it more so than E.E. Cummings at first glance anyway. But I really enjoyed that. So it's not that I hate all abstract poetry. I just felt that some of the poems didn't really fall where she wanted them to. So that was a solid 3 stars for me. I'm definitely going to read more from her. If I can insert the cover here, I will, because it's beautiful, and I am not a book collector, but I know a lot of people are. The next book that I read in January was my first 5-star of the year, which is super exciting. Like I said, I rarely give 5 stars. Was In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. And I listened to this on audiobook, and it's read by the author, which I appreciate. I always like hearing the audiobooks read by the person who wrote them. I think it lends a little more, I don't want to say authenticity, but it just makes sense to me. This is her memoir of surviving a relationship that involved emotional and verbal abuse with another woman. It's done in a creative nonfiction style. It's pretty clear that Machado went to the University of Iowa writing program. It's actually mostly written in second person, which is hilarious to me. I never thought that I would be a big fan of second person narratives. Last year I read Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir and The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin back to back, which also use second person narration. So apparently that's the thing that I'm into right now. It is uncomfortable. Hearing it as opposed to reading it, I did listen to this on audiobook, I think I think it makes it a little easier to process than reading it on the page. I don't know why, but not only is it obvious that she went to University of Iowa writing because of the second person narrative and the creative nonfiction aspect of this, but it's very lyrical. And I was so drawn into this. I can actually relate in some ways to a lot of the things that she said. I don't want to get into details on that, but there are definitely trigger warnings in this book. If you have survived an emotionally abusive relationship, be aware. There's a lot going on that while I was driving and listening to this, I almost had to stop at some points. It's not super explicit and there's not physical abuse. It just was kind of a gut punch hearing similar things that I had survived as well. And it's been a long time since I went through that, and it still came up, so just be prepared if you do read this. It is beautifully done. She touches on the fact that like lesbian relationships, queer relationships don't get the same attention when it comes to abuse, whether that be physical or verbal, as well as talking about how emotional abuse isn't taken seriously. And it's just a gut punch of a book. I really don't know how else to describe it. I can't recommend this enough. It was beautiful, and that seems so weird to say about someone's account of abuse, but it was breathtaking, and I really think this should be on like high school or college reading lists. If you can hear the vacuum, I apologize for that. Last but not least, I have been reading First Sister by Linden A. Lewis. This is the first in a space opera. I'm actually not done with it yet, but I wanted to get this video up sooner rather than later. I'm pretty close to finishing, and so far so good. It's falling around the 3 to 3.5 star range. I plan on continuing the series. I don't feel like I can talk a lot about it without getting into spoilers, just like other books, although it's a regular length book and not a novella. It covers 3 characters' perspectives. The first sister, who is like a comfort woman who is living on a ship that is staffed by people who serve Earth and Mars. And then it also follows Lido Sol Lucius, who is a soldier who is part of the like settlers on Mercury and Venus. And there has been a split in humanity since we've colonized other places. So Mars and Earth are kind of their own area, and then Venus and Mercury have their own societies, and they're at war with each other. There's also a third character who used to be connected with Lucius, named Hero, who is a non-binary character, which is awesome. The rep in this book is great. I think it struggles a little bit because it is the first in a series, and I'm actually not a huge series reader. I'd much rather read standalones most of the time. It's good so far. It's got my attention. There's been a lot of little things sprinkled throughout that I think are going to get touched on in the next book, hopefully, because there's a lot of open-ended stuff, not just with the main 3 characters, but also little things that you learn about the world or the galaxy, if you want to go that far with description. There's things about how synthetics are illegal because of a synthetic uprising. There's a brief discussion about the second secession of North America, which is terrifying right now. But yeah, just lots of little things that are this beautiful world building that I hope get some payoff in the next book. That's all that I've got so far. I do want to note that I got all of these books from my local library, which is fantastic, and I'm currently trying to plow my way through a bunch of other library books, so I will have more to talk about in February. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!